Well, praise the Lord. Here we are, another Thursday night, another night, or Friday night. What am I saying? It's Friday, Marcia. And I'm thinking it's Thursday. Boy, I'm all messed up. But it's good to be here tonight. It's good to have you here. And, I was thinking prior to, starting this evening, we live in a time when the Bible says where people are going to want their ears tickled. And I am so happy to say that with all the speakers that come to the Lord's Roundtable, such as yourself, all the preachers that come, there's no sugarcoating of it at all. You're not going to get your ears tickled on this line. You'll hear stuff, if you're in the will of God, that's going to excite you. But if you're outside of the will of God and you like things your way, you're not going to like what you're going to hear, but you need to hear it. And I am so confident in that, Marcia, that I am going to challenge everybody that's listening that if you go to the LordsRoundtable.com, it's under construction, but the contact tab works. Click on that. Leave me a comment. If you hear something that you think is wrong, or, don't always have to hear the negative. If you hear a speaker that you really enjoyed, you're really excited, and you learned, or whatever it might be, leave a comment on that too. And just put a comment on there. Fill out the contact information because I like to get back with you. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says submit, oh man, my phone number's even there. And I figure if you come to the Lord's Roundtable, you can't be any worse than I am, and I've got the number, so you all might as well have the number as well. Feel free to call me. Love to hear from you. So with that being said, we have Marcia Montenagro with us again here Friday. For those of you who follow on Facebook, you know what tonight's all about, and I'm excited about it. So with that being said, Marcia, we are just so excited about you being here. I know what you're going to tell us tonight is going to shock a whole lot of people, but that's why we're here. Oh. So with that being said, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm so grateful to be on the program again and have this opportunity, and I do pray that the information will be helpful to people and edifying. I did mention last week I did Occult Part 1, and during the broadcast, I was trying to remember the name of a book because we were talking about the occultism in Germany under Hitler. And I had mentioned that I had read a really good book on it that had got a lot of good reviews and was very well documented. And I was able to find that book in the title, and it's called Hitler's Monsters, A Supernatural History of the Third Reich. And it's by Eric Kurlander, Kurlander, Eric Kurlander. So I think it's a strange title. I don't think really the history is supernatural. It's a history of the supernatural beliefs in Germany at the time, so the way it's worded to me as a literature major, being picky about grammar, I'm not real happy with the title, but that's the only thing I don't like. The book is absolutely excellent and really has a lot of information in it. So I did want to, before I forgot, I wanted to give that because I said last week I would try to find out the name of the book and then give it, tonight. So there it is for those who want to know. And I am on Facebook, and if you want to ask me any questions, you can certainly do that on Facebook. I also have a website, ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org, and I have lots of articles on there. The articles on there will cover, many of the articles there address the topics I'm going to discuss tonight. So last week, I did a general introduction to the occult. I talked about the three basic areas of the occult: divination, spirit contact, and sorcery. And then I went into more detail into divination and spirit contact. And actually, I went into a lot of detail So there's quite a lot of detail on that program for people who missed that. Tonight I didn't get to the third area, which was sorcery, so I want to cover that first. And then I'm going to talk about witchcraft, basically the modern witchcraft movement or, religion. And then I'm going to talk about the Harry Potter series, because I think that is still an important topic, even though, the days when it was so popular and bookstores were selling out of the books and everything is gone. It influenced a lot of people and it influenced their culture. So first I'll start with sorcery. And sorcery usually is called magic by people who engage in it. They don't usually or hardly ever call it sorcery. But sorcery is a word used in the Old Testament and also in the New Testament, in Galatians and in Revelation. And so what is sorcery? Well, I think in the Bible, it is talking about methods that are used to bring about results that are not from God. The methods are not from God, and you're trying to basically bypass God in doing something. And it's really the same idea today. The idea is that you either alter reality or you bring something into reality in some way. So there's lots of different methods that fall in this area. There's, the more traditional methods would be involving certain tools that are used. Usually the idea is that you can imbue these tools with a certain energy that makes them magical so that they have some kind of power in them. And the way that you do that is different ways. You can do incantations. You can do carvings on the tools of certain symbols. And there again, there's different kinds of symbols that can be used, and maybe do a ritual that empowers the tool. Then in using a tool, usually different techniques are involved, like perhaps incantation or chanting again, and or visualizing, where you are visualizing in your mind a certain thing and you believe that your will has the ability to manifest it, or you believe that you are contacting spirits who will bring this about. Now, there's kind of two different areas of this part here. When you're dealing with people in neo-pagan religions like modern witchcraft, which I'm going to talk about more next, but it kind of is connected here too. They believe in the elements and the elemental spirits in nature. These are like nature spirits. And so they can believe that contacting the nature spirits can bring about things. And in the sorcery that's not witchcraft, they'll actually sometimes believe that they can contact, and they believe in demons. Some people who do sorcery actually believe in demons, and they believe that they can control the demons and get the demons to do what they want them to do. And so they basically are contacting these demons, these spirits who are fallen angels, and they believe they can control them with certain words or certain techniques that they do. So it gets very complicated. I never practiced, so I did not do any of this, nor was I interested in it. But I knew a little bit about it, and then after I got involved, my ministry started up, and I did more research. And I also had contact from time to time from people, mostly teenage boys, who were involved in this. And they were very upfront with me and telling me what they did. I remember very clearly one boy who was 15 told me that, I said, isn't it dangerous to contact these demons? I mean, why do you put yourself in harm's way by deliberately contacting them? And he said, yes, it's dangerous, but he said that's part of it. He said it's like walking on broken glass. And I'll never forget that he said that to me. I mean, it's very sad, and I tried very much to, say things to draw this boy away from what he was involved with and what he was interested in, and tried to talk to him about Christ. I don't know whatever happened with them, but I couldn't tell at the time that what I said really had any effect, but I was hoping that what I said was at least gave him something to think about. But he was very caught up in this, I think, because and more men than women are in sorcery. And I think it's because there's sort of a macho appeal to it. You're putting yourself in danger. You're doing something forbidden. You're doing something that's kind of dark, that people warn about. And so that appeals to a lot of young men. And so a lot of people into this are teenagers or young men in their 20s. Anyway, in my experience, I'll say that. I haven't done any kind of poll or anything, but in my experience, that's the situation. So the way I tend to define sorcery, because I think it's really a very broad area, is the belief that you can channel, harness, or manipulate or control some kind of energy, some kind of unmeasurable energy, an unknown, unseen energy, however you conceive of it. So a belief that you can somehow harness and control that or channel it in order to bring a certain result about. Now, you could also substitute energy there for spirits, a belief that you can control and manipulate spirits to bring about a certain goal. So whether it's some kind of energy or whether it's spirits, you are using techniques that you think is going to give you the power or the ability to control and manipulate these forces in order to make something happen, to get something to result from it. So that tends to be how I define sorcery. And if you define it that way, and I think it's a good definition. I mean, there might be people out there who, I don't know how many people would disagree with me. They'd have to already know what sorcery is to disagree with me, but there are people out there that do it, and I don't know if they would agree with that or not. But if you use that definition, then a lot of things that we actually see today that we think are good would fall under that. Because most people, when they hear the word sorcery, they think of something really dark and maybe scary. And what I just described, as far as, some of these people believing in contacting demons and everything, that's certainly very dark. But here's the funny thing about the occult and the New Age, is that things that are really dark and dangerous can be made to look very positive and helpful. And actually, that's what the New Age does. The occult is actually a little more obvious and a little more upfront about its defiance, I guess, if you want to use that word. Whereas the New Age tries very hard and does succeed at looking helpful and beneficial and oftentimes mainstream. So where I see the occult activity of sorcery in the New Age is in energy healing. and a lot of the alternative healing, which are based on beliefs in this unnameable or undiscoverable energy. You know, it's not a physical energy. You know, this isn't like an electrician who is working in your house, you know, on the electricity. You know, that's an energy that we know about, we can measure, and we have a certain amount of control over it. In fact, we have a lot of control over it. So when I say energy, I'm not talking about a physical energy. I'm talking about a supernatural energy. And it can have different names. And every culture has the beliefs. If you go to the non-Christian beliefs in many cultures, you find this belief is in all of them. So in China, it's called Qi, C-H-I. And the same concept, the same word but said differently is ki in maybe Korea, and I think maybe Japan says ki. So you can see it spelled K-I or Q-I. Then you have prana in India, P-R-A-N-A, and that's a word that comes into play in yoga. Because prana is very much a part of the practice of yoga, the belief in prana. So you have prana, you have ki and chi. You have in the South Pacific, in the animistic religions there, you have mana, M-A-N-A, which is another word for the same energy or force. In the United States, in the 1800s, you had something called vitalistic energy, or vitalism, or vital energy. And this was a belief in this force that animated nature, that you could tap into and use for healing. This was very much a part of the American landscape in especially the last half of the 1800s and the early 20th century. It played a part in different supposed healing practices like the Bach flower remedies and homeopathy. And homeopathy is still fairly popular today, unfortunately, even in the church. And it's based on this vitalistic belief. And then then in the New Age, the term, they don't really use the term vitalism. Sometimes they do, but they just say energy. Okay, so energy healing is a name for many types of healing, such as Reiki, R-E-I-K-I. And there, you notice the K-I. Okay, so I hope I'm back because I got pulled off the air there for a minute. The K-I at the end of Reiki is like the chi and ki that I was talking about. So there's Reiki. That's actually, unfortunately, is even offered at some hospitals. And then you have other energy healing that it's called healing touch and healing hands, or sometimes it's called hands of light. These are all forms of energy healing. And another one is therapeutic touch. Now, even though it's using the word touch, they don't necessarily touch you. And what they believe they're doing is channeling healing energy to you. So I consider all of this a form of sorcery. And it might surprise some people to know that healing, the idea of healing, is very, very big in the occult and the New Age. It's a prominent part of the occult, and it's a prominent part of the New Age, prominent part of witchcraft. So you have all these forms of healing that are occultic and New Age now mainstreaming in the culture, and people who for some reason are disenchanted with their doctors or with the medical system, or they've had bad experiences, they think the alternative healings are an option. And actually, I've been warning about it for a long time. They're not an option. The fact they're called alternative means that they are not credible. They don't have any scientific basis. That's why they're called alternative, and that's why they're not a part of mainstream medicine. Now, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, unfortunately, some hospitals are offering some of these alternatives because of the demand, because so many people now are into it. And I think the alternative healing industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar year industry. I think I heard it was $30 billion a year. I could be wrong, but it's some incredible amount. I know it's in the billions. A lot of people are making money basically offering you an occult or New Age form of healing that is based on spiritual beliefs and pseudoscience. It's not science. So there's a word of warning for that. And that's where I see sorcery. So it's right out there in the open. And it fits the definition. And really, it's no different than the person trying to do incantations or etching symbols on his magical tools in order to do a spell and bring about something. It's absolutely no different in terms of what the beliefs are. And even if the person is unaware that it's sorcery, it's still sorcery. So, I think it's very dangerous. I do know people who have been treated with some of these things and had very bad experiences. I know people who used to do these kinds of treatments who also had bad experiences. Reiki healers all of these energy healers have spirit guides. They all have spirit guides. Now, I talked about spirit guides last week and how they're fallen angels. And all of these energy healers have spirit guides. So when you go get a treatment from one of these people, you're not just exposing yourself to them, you're exposing yourself to their spirit guides. Now, I'm not saying that to be scary, and I'm not saying that a Christian is going to be possessed by a demon because of it, because for one thing, Christians can't be possessed, but you're making yourself vulnerable to something that's evil, and that's bad enough. So I think I will move on from that, but I needed to talk about that. The next section is going to be witchcraft. And so that word can mean a lot of things, and actually it means something different in other cultures, but I'm talking about witchcraft here in the United States. But first, I want to mention that there is no Hebrew word for witchcraft because it's a modern word. So it's modern in the terms that the word didn't exist when the Bible was written. So at least the Old Testament. So even though there are words translated as witchcraft into English in the Old Testament, the reason they're using the word witchcraft is because they're referring to either divination or doing enchantments and spells. And so sometimes the Hebrew word that means divination or enchantment or spells will be translated, or medium, being a medium, that is one who contacts the dead, will be translated as witch or witchcraft. And that's why when you have Saul who goes to the medium, in some Bibles it'll say the witch of Endor, in other Bibles it'll say the medium of Endor. She really was a medium, but they used to see, when they translated it into English, that was kind of the same thing. So there's a lot of confusion on that word because it's just a generic word referring to some occult practices. But because today we have the modern religion of witchcraft, it's become more specific. And also there's another area called Wicca, Wicca, which is also a form of modern witchcraft. And there are people who follow Wicca and who don't think that the people who call themselves witches are actually really doing witchcraft. And then people who do witchcraft and don't call themselves Wiccans think that Wicca is not real witchcraft. So they don't agree with each other on the terms. But basically, I just put them both in the same category of modern witchcraft. They do believe, most of them, not all of them, that it's a religion. Many of them believe in a goddess instead of a god, or they believe in the goddess and her consort, who is a god. But the goddess definitely has, preeminence over the god. The main thing in modern witchcraft is that nature is the model. Nature is the standard for everything. So what happens in nature is always the most ideal and the most natural and the best thing. So they look to nature. They believe that nature is sacred, and some of them will even say that the goddess is nature, and so they'll equate the goddess with nature. They believe that there's powers and energies and forces in nature, although they may not say those are supernatural, but they do believe that there are these powers there that they can use. So it's very nature-oriented and usually, although not always, goddess-oriented. And when I'm talking about Wicca and witchcraft here, those are actually only two parts of the larger category of neo-paganism, because neo-paganism also has groups like the Druids, the modern Druids, who follow or say they're following Druidry. And then you have various forms of neo-paganism. There's just a whole wide range of them. There's Odinism, which follows the Norse gods and the Northern Germanic gods. And you have the Celtic, neo-paganism. I mean, there's so much. You probably couldn't even write a list of all of them. So there's a lot of variations on this. So I'm mainly focusing on witchcraft and Wicca when I'm talking about the goddess and everything that I'm saying. I did have a lot of clients who were into modern witchcraft and Wicca, and I have talked to them in my ministry. Some of them have just identified as goddess worshipers, or they're just pagan, but they aren't into Wicca or witchcraft. So once again, you have different labels and you have different beliefs. They don't all have the same beliefs, but there is a tendency to make nature kind of the final authority and the final word on everything. Most people in modern witchcraft and Wicca believe in doing good. They believe you use your powers and your energies to do good, that you shouldn't do bad. Although, there's some who are very open about, yes, you can try to put a spell on someone to harm them if they've harmed you, but you have to be very careful and you have to know what you're doing. So there are some who will say that. Not all of them agree with that. They also tend to be very focused on the here and now. Last week, I talked a little bit about the difference between the New Age outlook on life and the occult outlook on life, and how they're not the same. And one of the things I said about the occult outlook on life is that it's very here and now oriented, much more than future oriented, whereas the New Age is very future oriented. So there's a big difference in the outlook on life. And so witchcraft and Wicca has that outlook that says, we're going in the present. The here and now is the most important thing. So they're much more present oriented than future oriented. And then some of them have very, very specific beliefs. There are groups Actually, they actually use the word coven, where they'll have a certain number of people in a coven. Then there are people who practice this on their own, and they're not in any group at all. And there's different forms of Wicca and witchcraft, so there's like a whole list of them. There's a lot of them. I have a very detailed chapter on Wicca and witchcraft in a book that's called World Religions and Cults, Volume 2. So that book, of course, has a lot of different chapters on different topics. I am just the author of one chapter, but my chapter is on Wicca and witchcraft, and it's extremely detailed. I also have an article on Wicca and witchcraft on my website. So if you want to read that, that might give more information. I don't know if Steve is there or not. I know he's driving his truck, so I'm not sure. I'm just he'll chime in if he can.
He put me in that category tonight. So.
Oh, hi, Mona. Hi. I didn't know. He told me you would be there, but I hadn't heard you say anything, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, I'm actually writing these things down. As far as discussing. You're talking about the witchcraft, and I don't want to interrupt you because you're doing so awesome. But can you explain to us, why they say a difference between? Well, I run into people and say, no, I'm a witch, but I'm a white witch. So
okay,
I'm like, a witch is a witch.
Right. Oh no, I'm very glad you asked that, Mona, because that's often, many times they will say a white witch. And what they mean by that is, in their minds, being a white witch means that you're using witchcraft for a good purpose or for good purposes. And they are not using it for bad purposes. Oh, there's a really loud noise there. Uh-oh. Wow. I think something went wrong. Oh my goodness.
By the machine on the phone, so what that is.
I'm here, but I'm not talking because of that noise.
Yeah, I hear that, but just texting to let you know. I don't know what that is. I'm like scrambling. I don't know to call back in or not. Sorry about this, Marcia. I have to change that.
Okay, I kind of hear a voice, but
yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah, hold on, I'm trying to text him. Yeah, I don't know what that is. Interference, everyone. I am not at the computer, so I can't stop the recording and restart it. So I'm looking to get hold of the doorman. mine or yours, but.
Maybe I should hang up and call back.
Yeah, this is terrible. I tried to tell that and got back in. I don't know what it is. I tried to get a hold of him.
Hello.
What kind of laundry soap do you want?
It don't matter.
Alright, I'm stopping now, and then I'll be home.
Okay. Okay.
Alright, bye.
Bye.
What? That's not a haunted house.
No, you go in there.
Okay, here.
It's still there. It's still a little bit there. It's still there, but I couldn't hear anything, and so I just stopped talking because it was really loud. Are you still there, Steve?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay. I was talking to Mona. She'd asked me a question, and I was answering it, and then all of a sudden that noise started. It was really bad. Yeah. I thought I could hear Mona talking. I wasn't sure. I could hear this voice every once in a while, but I couldn't hear anything she was saying, and the noise just, I didn't know whether I should hang up and call back, but I thought I would just hang in there and wait a little bit.
Right. So we're okay, and we're still on and live, correct?
Yes.
I don't know. I hope so. I'll just keep going with my answer.
Yes, and Mona, keep me in.
Okay.
I'll rephrase. I'll just go back to the beginning. Mona had asked me. She said she ran into some people who would say they were a white witch, and she wanted me to explain, well, what does that mean? Why are they saying white witch and not just witch? So I just started to begin to answer that question, which I'm really glad she asked. So, they'll say a white witch because by that they mean that they use their powers for good. They only want to do good things with their powers. They don't want to do anything harmful. And there is sort of a motto in modern Wicca, do no harm, do what you will. And so that's the idea behind that. And they believe that there are people who might do, dark witchcraft or black witchcraft who would use their powers to bring about harm to people. And generally speaking, most people in witchcraft are against that. So they want to identify themselves with white witchcraft. They want to make sure if they're talking to you that you don't think they're going to use their powers for something evil, because they believe that, they want, and they also want you to think that witchcraft can be a good thing. So if they do white witchcraft, and in their minds they're not doing anything wrong, and then maybe you will think, well, okay, white witchcraft is okay because you're only using power to help people. So that is the thinking behind that. Now, of course, there is really no difference. In their minds, there's a difference between white witchcraft and black witchcraft, but actually there is no difference because witchcraft is it's casting spells for one thing, and it is true that passage, Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12, specifically forbids casting spells. And then there's a few other passages in the Old Testament that talk about doing enchantments. I think one of them is in Ezekiel. So doing enchantments, and there's another one about incantations, and those are all part of witchcraft. So all of those things are forbidden by God and are part of the occult practices. Also, witches are worshiping false gods because they don't worship the true God of the Bible. So they have either a goddess or they'll have different gods. Now, there are some witches who will say they believe in Jesus, and there's actually something called Christian Wicca. It's been around since the 90s, so it's nothing really recent. Although recently, I think there was an article on it or something, and a lot of people on Facebook were telling me about it or giving me a link to it. But it's not really anything new. And so these are people who say they're Christian Wiccans, and they'll say Jesus, they'll believe in Jesus, but really what they believe about Jesus is not that he's a savior who came to die for sins. They'll believe in him as a good teacher, so they'll look on him as a sort of good ethical teacher. They don't really agree with Christianity. So when they say they're a Christian Wiccan, they're much more Wiccan than Christian. They're not actually Christian, but they will use that term. And there was another thing I wanted to say about Wicca that's really important to know. Even though witches and Wiccans will say their religion is very, very old, or sometimes they'll even say it's the oldest religion in the world, and they like to say it's older than Christianity. Actually, it's a very new religion. It's extremely new. It's started probably in the lifetime of a lot of people, even listening to the program. It was started in England by a man named Gerald Gardner, who claimed to have met some witches in the forest, the New Forest there in England, and he claimed he was initiated into witchcraft, and he had different people he claimed that taught him these things, and then he, with all this knowledge, supposedly he was starting this movement or this religion, or he wasn't starting it. He said he was reestablishing an old religion. So he said it was an old religion. There's absolutely no historical evidence that witchcraft was ever a religion. But he started it, and that was like in the very late 40s. In 1950, I think England, 1950 or 1951, England declared Wicca a religion. So it was actually declared a religion. And by that time, there wasn't a large number of people in England that were followers, but there was, quite a few. And it gradually grew over the years, especially in the 60s. In 1963, and in England, meanwhile, another man named Alexander Sanders started another witchcraft group, kind of in competition with Gerald Gardner. So the people who followed Gerald Gardner were Gardnerites, and the people who followed Alexander Sanders were practicing I think it's called Alexandrian witchcraft. So it was like two different branches of witchcraft. And then a man named Raymond Buckland came over to the United States from England in 1963, and he started witchcraft movements in the United States. And so it started over here and gradually got some followers in the 60s, and not that many, not enough for most people to even be aware of it until really the early and mid 90s. It became widespread enough that I knew witches and Wiccans when I was in the New Age in the 80s. So they were definitely around, but I knew about them because I was an astrologer and I was in the New Age community. I don't know if most people were aware of them. I knew about them because of what I did in the community that I was in. But they were definitely there. And there was, I actually knew people in 5 different witchcraft groups in Atlanta. So it's still, I think it wasn't that well known and was kind of on the fringes. Then in the 90s, I think it started getting a little popular, and younger people started getting involved in it, because in 1995, I was giving a talk to a youth group. I wasn't even in full-time ministry in 1995. I was working full time, and I was talking in churches and things like that on the side. And I was talking at one church in this area where I live, and an eighth grader came up and asked me after the talk. He told me that there was someone in his school who said that she was a witch. And actually, I can't remember now if it was a boy or a girl that he was talking about. And anyway, this person said they were a witch, and that the Trinity came from the idea in witchcraft of the 3 stages of witchcraft. There's 3 things they have: maiden, mother, and crone. And the maiden, of course, is the young girl, and the mother is the married maternal woman, and then the crone is the older wise woman. So they have this image of the 3. And this person told him, well, the Trinity comes from that. So he was a little confused and wanted me to explain that. And so what really struck me was this 8th grader knows a witch in his school. Okay, that was the first time I heard of them being in the schools, especially like that grade level. And so then I started asking youth groups where I was speaking, do any of you know any witches in your school? Are there any kids in your school saying they're witches? And kids were raising their hand and saying yes. So that's when I became aware that they were in the schools, and how long they'd been there, I don't know, but that was the year I became aware of it. So I wrote something up on Wicca and witchcraft, and I didn't have a computer yet, so I didn't have anything online. I did handouts at the schools, and I started talking about it when I talked to youth groups. And then gradually, of course, by like 1998, I think is when there was a big article about the Wiccans at an army base in Texas, I think, who wanted the right to have worship services. And they were petitioning the military. And this became a really big news story because people were sort of shocked that there were these people in the military. Now, I wasn't shocked. I was a little bit surprised, but I wasn't shocked. And after that, it became a little more common. There were more people that knew about it, but it was still not very well known until, I don't think maybe till most Christians had heard of it till maybe 2010 or around there. And even now, there may be some Christians who don't know what Wicca is or don't know there's modern witches. I don't know. I think most people are aware of it now because there's a lot more publicity now, and it's become very glamorous. It's become glamorized. And so now I see all these articles, newspaper articles online about how the millennials are getting drawn to things like astrology and tarot cards and witchcraft. And because witchcraft has this element of feminism in it, it appeals very, very much to women because witchcraft is very woman-focused. It's focused on female energy, and the earth is seen as female. And of course, the goddess usually has preeminence over any male gods. So it draws a lot of women. And I think because of that feminist draw, that's one reason a lot of these millennial women are drawn to it, and they feel empowered by it. It's sort of, they feel that witchcraft honors them as a woman. That's how they feel. And so it makes them feel proud to be a woman. It makes them feel connected to the earth. And of course, the modern environmental movement plays into that. So there's an appeal from the environmental movement as well. And that is one reason, the millennials are really drawn to it, because they've sort of been raised with the ideas of feminism and taking care of the environment. That's been stuff they've heard in school. They've grown up with that. And here's witchcraft, which is offering, it seems to be offering something that values these things that they think are important. I think that's one of the strong appeals of it, and why a lot of people in that generation are drawn to it. It's not mainstream. I don't see witchcraft as ever being mainstream, but it's definitely become more popular and more acceptable. And one reason it's more acceptable is because of my next topic, Harry Potter. And Harry Potter series, ironically enough, is not really about witchcraft, it's about sorcery. However, because there's so much in the books about casting spells, that's tied into the idea of witchcraft and, being a witch. So I don't even, of course, and the word witch is used in Harry Potter because the people who aren't witches are the muggles, and, they're not as savvy. They're kind of behind things, or they're actually sometimes portrayed as stupid in the books. But the other people, the magical people like Harry Potter, are much, much smarter and have more abilities. And I think they're definitely portrayed as superior to witches. But really, what the whole Harry Potter series is based on, a lot of it is based on alchemy, because of the symbols that are used, especially in the first 2 or 3 books, are very much the symbols used in alchemy. Now, alchemy is really a big area, and I'm not an expert on it, but I did a lot of reading on it when I was reading the Harry Potter books and then writing articles. And by the way, I have articles on my website on all the Harry Potter books and all the Harry Potter movies. So I invested a big chunk of my life. And the articles are I got to tell you, they're very detailed. I was very careful when I read the books. I took notes. I looked things up. I checked things out. A lot of the stuff I came across, I was familiar with from my New Age days and from being an astrologer and knowing things about numerology and some other practices in the New Age. Actually, they're in the books. I'm going to mention a few of them. But alchemy plays a big role. And in fact, the first book is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Well, the Sorcerer's Stone is this idea that goes back to alchemy, which was really big, like in the 13th century, like the 13th and 14th, maybe 15th century as well. And it was the idea that you could turn base metals into gold through magical practices. And you had to do all these very complicated things to do it. And they believed there was a stone that could give you immortality. And it was called the Sorcerer's Stone. And so the alchemists were always in search of that. They were always trying to I think they were trying to, I'm not sure if they were in search of it or trying to make it. But anyway, that was a major thing, and alchemy was the Sorcerer's Stone. And it comes up in Harry Potter because actually, I can't remember if it's in the second or third book, there's a character that's referred to named Nicholas Flamel. And I think Hermione and Ron, Harry Potter's best friends, are talking about this Nicholas Flamel and how he had found the Sorcerer's Stone. And I think my memory on this is fuzzy. He was still alive somewhere because even though he lived in like 1500 or something, he found the Sorcerer's Stone and was still alive. I looked up Nicholas Flamel, and Nicholas Flamel actually was a real historical person who was an alchemist and supposedly found this stone. Now, of course, there is no such thing. This is a myth, the stone. And of course, no such thing exists or could exist. But this is part of, when you get into the occult and the New Age, there's a lot of myth-like stories and ideas that are treated as though they're actually fact. And this is just the way the New Age and the occult thinks. This is how they see things. And so they believe things that are myths, like the whole Atlantis thing. in the New Age about the city of Atlantis, and there are all these tales about it and everything. You come across that. The New Age is like that. They don't really care about facts. They really would believe myths over facts. And in the occult, it's very similar. So this idea of Nicholas Flamel, it is true. He was a historical person, and he was an alchemist, and he was reputed to have found this stone of immortality. So that's really true, and that's in the Harry Potter books, which I found very interesting. There's some other things in the book. For example, there's a binding spell that's used in one of the books. And there actually really is a binding spell in witchcraft. I'm not saying that it really works, but there is a binding spell. Also, there's a big, huge section of one of the books where Harry learns to summon the Patronus. And Patronus is a word that goes, we have the word patron. It's like a guardian. Okay, so it's like a guardian spirit. But the way that he's taught to summon the Patronus and how the Patronus will protect him, this is very, very similar to something in the New Age and the occult that I found out later actually goes back to Asia. And it's the conjuring of something called a thought form. And anyway, the way I heard of it, and I heard it discussed when I was in the New Age, was how you can conjure a thought form, and a thought form is something that you think about and you produce it in your mind and you believe in it and actually becomes reality. Now, it doesn't take on material form. It's not something that you can, I think supposedly you're supposed to be able to make it like, you're supposed to be able to do that in the occult. But in the New Age, the idea was that this would be sort of like a protective spirit. It would become independent of you and would be sort of like this guide or protector in a spirit form. Now, I never tried to do it. I read about it and heard other people talking about it. But when I was reading about Harry Potter learning to summon the Patronus, it was very, very similar to that. And I later talked to somebody who had done the New Age, and she said the exact same thing to me. She said that reminded her of the summoning of a thought form, or the conjuring of a thought form. We both had thought the same thing when we were reading that part of the book. So I find that very interesting. I actually did several Facebook posts on it. I've done a lot of Facebook posts on Harry Potter showing how there's actual occult concepts in the books. And even if they give the spells silly names, or some of the spells are silly spells that J.K. Rowling just made up, there's a lot of them that are actually true. And of course, in my articles, I go into a lot of detail on this. In the 5th book, Hermione gives Harry Potter gives Hermione a book on numerology that she's been wanting. And she's really thrilled and happy and thanks Harry and says, this is the book I wanted. Well, numerology, I think in the Harry Potter, they don't call it numerology. They call it, I forgot what they call it, but it is numerology. And, that's a real thing. That's an actual thing. It's a practice of divination where you believe that the numbers actually mean something. They have a meaning, and you can apply that meaning to your life. So you can break your name down into numbers. You break your birth date down into one number. And this number sort of represents who you are, and it presents your destiny and all of this kind of stuff. I fooled around with numerology some, so I took a course in it. So I know I'm not an expert on numerology, but I know a lot. And I used it kind of along with my astrology sometimes when I was doing my astrological readings. So I can recognize it really quickly when it's, when it's there, when it's being used. And I came to find out, in doing research when I'm writing the articles on the Harry Potter books, there was a website. In fact, there's two websites I need to talk about. One of them was a website, and it was clearly oriented towards children or young teenagers. And it was supposedly a website run by Hermione. Well, of course, Hermione's just, a fictional character in the book. But to make the website appealing, it was run by Hermione, and it was a numerology website, and it was teaching children how to do numerology. And that all ties back into the fifth book of Harry Potter, where she gets the book on numerology. So somebody decided to do this website, I don't know who, and it was actually telling you how to do numerology. Another website I found that was even more sinister was run by Scholastics. Now, Scholastics, of course, I think everybody knows Scholastics is a big publisher, an educational type publisher in the United States, and Scholastics actually produced the Harry Potter books. And they used Harry Potter in a lot of the gifted children programs in the schools. Harry Potter was the books they used for reading. Well, Scholastics had a website on Harry Potter that I explored, and they had a page where they invited the people who came to the page, which was basically, they were clearly talking to children or young teenagers. They invited them to send in spells. And they said, send us in your spells or your favorite spells. And so they had them all published. And I read through them. I mean, I spent a long time doing this. I went there several times, and each time I was there, I would spend a really hefty chunk of time there. So I read through a lot of this particular web page. And I read through the spells, and then they would have whoever sent them in would say something about them, like, oh, this is my favorite spell. Now, some of them were just almost like little rhymes that obviously some kids made up that kind of sound like a spell. But a lot of them were from young, teenagers into Wicca and witchcraft, because they would put their age. They would put their name or their first name and their age after the spell. And a lot of them were like, from Sally, age 13, and, oh, yes, this is my favorite spell in Wicca. So I was really appalled at this, because basically this is giving an endorsement and an encouragement to kids to get interested. If they aren't already interested in spells, this certainly would get them interested in it and get them interested in Wicca and get into actual witchcraft. So I was alarmed when I came across this. And, this is the kind of thing Harry Potter is producing. This is part of the results of Harry Potter. I felt at the time that this was going to desensitize the culture to the concept of witchcraft and doing spells and doing occult practices, because it made it look good, because Harry was always using his powers for good, right? And he was using the same power, that Voldemort, his enemy, was using. They were both using the same power. In the books, the implication is that the source of these powers is the same source. And that is actually the concept in witchcraft and in sorcery, is that there's a source of power. It's a neutral source, and it depends on how you use the power as to whether it's good or bad. This is especially true in witchcraft. So, the power is neutral, and then if you use the power for good, it's a good thing. If you use the power for bad, it's bad. So if Harry's using the power for good, it's good. And if Voldemort is using it for bad purposes, then he's bad. He's the villain, and Harry's the hero, but they're both using the same kind of power, which in God's eyes is wrong. Using it for good doesn't make it good. And this is a problem I was seeing, that I was constantly trying to explain to people who were defending the books to me and telling me, oh, they're just fiction, and kids know the difference between fiction and reality. And I said, that's not the point. Yes, they know the difference, but the thing is, they get hooked into these stories because they emotionally identify with the characters. And here you have the main character doing occult practices. I mean, he took a class called divination, and he had another class called potions, making magical potions. Well, that's actually done in witchcraft too. And he was casting spells and learning how to cast spells. And those are all things that are actual practices. And in fact, of course, casting spells is forbidden by God very specifically. And doing incantations is forbidden by God. And these are parts of the books, and these are things Harry Potter and his friends did and were learning how to do. So to me, it was so obviously a problem. It was just obvious. It's like, if God says these things are bad, it doesn't matter how much you like Harry Potter, or, how good he seems to be, or how much your children love to read the books. That doesn't make it okay. You can't you can't make something that God says is bad, you can't make it okay. You can try, but it's not going to work. You might convince yourself, but you certainly aren't going to convince me. And I had a real battle with people on this. I can tell you a lot of people were against me. I had so much email going on at this time, people disagreeing with me, attacking me, telling me I was, I don't know, I was legalistic or narrow-minded, or I was being too literal or something. And to me, it was so clear. I think a lot of people who disagreed with me really, I think part of the problem was they don't think the occult is real. They think the occult is just something that's made up. It's kind of like a fairy tale. And I think that was part of the problem. And so, I was always referring to Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12. And I said, no, these practices go way back to the worship of false gods. That's where these things come from. And they're still around. And they're still basically the same thing. Sometimes they have different names, or they're done differently, but it's the same idea there. So I was really, a lot of people did agree with me. A lot of people didn't. People thought I was being kind of mean to talk against a children's book. You just aren't popular. When you take a stand against something really popular, you are not popular. That's kind of the bottom line there. But really, to me, it was so clear. And I feel that my concerns have been justified, because now people almost yawn at the idea of somebody being a witch or doing witchcraft. It seems almost harmless. And we on television programs since Harry Potter, more books came out that were like Harry Potter, and a lot of TV shows. I was just reminding someone today or yesterday about Hallmark in 2008 had a movie called The Good Witch. And it was so popular, it was such a hit, that they made a series out of it. So they had all these different movies on The Good Witch. They had Good Witch second movie, Good Witch the third movie, Good Witch the fourth. I don't know how many they had, but they had quite a few. And it's this woman, they never show her actually doing obvious witchcraft, but it's very clear, because I watched a couple of the movies to see, are they really going to show witchcraft, or how are they presenting this? She clearly has witchcraft powers. That is, nobody could see the movies and say that's not true. That's not the case. So it's a whole idea. Plus, she's called the Good Witch. So, that was seen as a good thing, and it was a very popular movie. So now we've gone from several decades ago, when witchcraft was seen as either scary or evil or bad, to actually seeing it as a good thing. And I really think Harry Potter was a real big part of that. And in fact, after the first couple of Harry Potter books came out, they were so popular. I read in an article in a newspaper that 4 publishers of children's books had decided to publish books similar to Harry Potter. They were getting on the Harry Potter bandwagon, and they were publishing books about children or young teenagers who had magical powers, all because of Harry Potter. So it opened the door really to having the idea not only of witchcraft being okay, but having a young person, a child or a teenager do witchcraft. And then, of course, after that, there were so many book series for children and young adults featuring, witches or vampires or people who did magic and who did occult practices. I couldn't even begin to keep up with them. There were just so many. I would have had to give up everything, and even eating and sleeping, just to keep up with all of that. So it definitely unleashed something in the culture, and I think we're seeing the results of it now. And a lot of these millennials grew up on Harry Potter, and so it's not a bad thing to them, because Harry Potter was good. So anyway, that's my song and dance for tonight. Because I think I've been talking about an hour or so.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I agree with you. We have been, emerged in so much, in the media about witchcraft and warlocks and demons and good ones, bad ones, and bad ones working with good ones. You just become so I don't know, complacent. You're so used to it being around you that it doesn't even faze you. You don't take the seriousness of it.
Exactly. That's called desensitization. And that was what I kept saying. I said, because a lot of people said to me, well, my children read Harry Potter and it didn't make them want to become witches. And I said, I'm not saying that Harry Potter is going to make people, it might make a few interested in it, but I don't think that's the main problem. The main problem is desensitization.
That's
and
right.
I definitely think it did that. And also I said, it's kind of a mixed message to your child. If you tell your child, well, Harry Potter is okay, it's okay to read that book, but, actual witchcraft is bad, to me, that's confusing to a child.
Right.
Because it's like, well, okay, if witchcraft is bad, especially if the child knows the Bible says it's bad, but my parents are okay with me reading this book about this boy who's casting spells. I don't know. Frankly, I would think that would be confusing. That's what we call a mixed message.
Oh yeah.
So that was another problem that I saw with the books.
Right. And it's like going to your teenage son and saying pornography is bad, but I want you to read this porn, or I want you to read this Playboy magazine. It's not that bad. It's
exactly.
You're telling them to
pictures. Yeah, you're saying
exactly.
Pictures. You're not really doing anything. You're just looking at pictures. Yeah, it's kind of like that. And I got so frustrated sometimes. I'm telling you, it was a really kind of rough time there sometimes when this was all going on. And then I went through a very similar thing, write me and tell me why, and I had, oh my goodness, I had so many emails. People really wrote me. They really wanted to tell me about it. So I had a lot of these people. I had personal contact through email with these people. And one time I went to a club where they had, it wasn't really a vampire club. It was a goth club, but it was kind of, there is a relationship with the goth movement and the vampire movement. They're not the same thing. And I talked to some people there, but my concern with these books, part of it was some of the powers they describe are kind of occult powers. But one of the things that really bothered me was that the girl who fell in love with this vampire would say things. she became so obsessed with him that she would say things like, I'm willing to give up heaven to be with you, because he told her, because she wanted to be turned into a vampire so she could be with him forever. And, he said, well, if you do that, you have to give up heaven. And she's like, well, I'm willing to give up heaven for you, and she was really, there were so many unethical and immoral things in the book. And I tried to point those out at the time when they were real popular, I was getting asked about them a lot. And so I talked about them a lot more then. I hardly ever talk about them now, except right at this moment. But I found something very interesting. I was reading, I found out the author is a Mormon, which I thought was interesting. And actually, I found some websites from ex-Mormons who had read the book and were showing how there were Mormon ideas in the books, which I thought was really interesting. And I helped me when she becomes a vampire and she's living this life where they don't have to sleep, and because in Edward's house, when she goes to Edward's house for the first time, she notices there are no beds because he doesn't have to sleep. And so the vampire life in these books is kind of the Mormon idea of what their life will be like after death, when they get what they call their exaltation and everything. They're super powerful. They don't have to sleep. Everything's wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. So it was interesting to say that these former Mormons were finding these parallels. But one of the most interesting things I came across was I read an interview with the author. I think her name's Stephanie Meyer, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was one of the most interesting interviews I ever read, because the reporter was asking her, what gave you the idea for the book? How did you come up with this? And she had a dream. And she said, I had a dream and I saw this young girl in a field with this guy, this handsome guy that she really liked, and he was like sparkling in the sun, because in her vampire books, the vampires sparkle in the sun. And he was a vampire, and he was, telling her he couldn't be with her, or something like that. So anyway, she said that dream got her to think that she could make a story out of this. And then later, this is what happened later, and I don't remember if it was the same interview or another interview. I can't remember what the question was. The reporter asked her some question, and in her answer, she said that she had a terrifying dream where Edward came to her in the dream. And see, in her books, Edward and his family don't kill people for blood. They kill animals instead. So apparently they don't need human blood. They can live on animal blood. So that's how Stephanie Meyer got Edward and his family to be quote unquote good vampires, whereas other vampires actually would kill people. And Edward tells this to the girl that he's, who's in love with him. We don't kill people for blood. We just kill animals. Well, Stephanie Meyer had a dream where she said, Edward appeared to me and he was enraged. He was extremely angry with me because he told me that he wanted human blood. And she said she was very frightened. And she woke up and she was actually very frightened, as though, this had actually happened. She didn't say that she believed it happened, but the dream was very scary. Now, the first thing that came to me when I read about how she got the idea for it, how she saw this girl and guy in the field, my first idea of this was a spirit guide. And I don't know if you know or not, but Mormons are very open to hearing from the dead. They believe it's okay. They believe it's okay to contact your dead ancestors. Okay, a lot of people with Mormon ministries, if you ever have Bill McKeever on, and maybe you have had, you can ask him about this because he's an expert on Mormonism. But they've told me that the Mormons don't see this as a bad thing. So they're open to spirit contact. And so when I read this about her dream, there was something about her dream that was very realistic to me. And I just thought, I wonder if a spirit guide gave her this idea. And then when I heard about the scary Edward coming into her dreams and telling her he wanted human blood, I thought, man, this is like demonic, you know? This is like the angry spirit guide, because she was making these vampires good in her books. That's all my own opinion, you know. I have no way to prove that. But having had spirit guides myself and knowing a lot about this, having done spirit contact and dealt with this area for a very long time, a lot of times I get a certain idea when I'm reading something, and then it sort of pans out later that I was right. So I just feel like that's what was going on with Stephanie Meyer. Really do. I don't think she realized it, but that's what I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to say really quick, because you're talking about these. I told Steve I had to go, but this is interesting. I wanted to get this, but I like the fact that you're hitting on these movies and things like that, because people, they go to watch them and really don't, a lot of people don't think nothing of it. They go to watch all these horror movies, it, and I mean movies that I cannot watch. I mean, people go watch them. I'm like, no, because I'm out by myself a lot. I'm on the road. No, I'm not watching this. But one night I was dreaming, and the Holy Spirit had quickened in me. He said, go and look at the back of the movies, the Disney movies, because we're talking about Harry Potter and all. And then so he asked me, he says, go back and look at the Disney movies. And as I did, the favorite ones that we grew up watching, Cinderella, Never-Ending Story, Snow White, all of them, every one of the back of it had, and I had to do a message on this because that's why he woke me up and told me to go and look. Because he said, now that you know what I'm showing you, then you bring it to the congregation. So what I saw was, like you're saying, the enchanting, the enchanting force, the witch that gave Snow White the apple, Cinderella, you got the fairy godmother that probably the good, you would call her the good witch, fairy godmother.
Yeah, she's essentially a witch. Yeah.
So these things that the Holy Spirit brought to my attention, because I now have grandchildren, and so it was like, whoa, like when we were growing up, we watched these and we loved them, not knowing that they had, the back of it had spell binding. It said, I've even seen Christian material on the back of it. So this is spell binding. What? What are you talking about? Why are you got this spell binding, on the back of this book? And so, you see this, and unless you're enlightened about it, I don't think you really pay attention to it. You just in all of the movie. But when it says casting spells, the spell binding, even the oh goodness, with the princess and the frog or something like that had all kinds of voodoo in it, and they were singing voodoo, and you could see them making the potions. So unless you know about it, you just watch it, and then I'm like, well, wait a minute, what about Bewitched? That's truly witchcraft. And she even went with her mother and her sister to a witch seance. So the Lord enlightened me about that.
Yeah, there's
so
parts.
I had to preach it.
Yeah, there's parts of Bewitched, like when she's just wrinkling her nose and has something happens, where that I consider that sort of fantasy, not real witchcraft. But when it got into her family, like her mother and then her father, he was like this he was very much of a witch figure, and they would go to their witch gatherings. It got much darker. It wasn't just her wrinkling her nose to clean up the house before, Darren got home or something. It got darker when it got into her extended family. And so these things can seem very, very innocent. And I do want to say that at least in Snow White, the witch was bad, because what I always say to people is it's not so much whether there's a witch in it or not. Is it showing the witch is good, or is it showing that witchcraft is a good thing? If witchcraft is a bad thing, I'm not saying you necessarily, that would necessarily be a good book to read, but at least if witchcraft is a bad thing, then it would go along with what God says, or casting spells is a bad thing. But the problem is all these books and movies are showing them as good things, Now, I do want to say this. This is really important because I did not say this last week, and I was just convicted all week about it. And I was like, I've got to say it this Friday because I didn't say it last week. I want to say that Jesus Christ has power over all rulers and authorities. And all this stuff I'm talking about, the fallen angels and the demons and everything, this is not, I'm not saying any of this to scare people or to make them think that, somehow, God's not in charge or something, because Jesus, there's several places in the New Testament where it talks about Jesus has been put in charge of all powers and authorities. He said in Matthew 28, the end of Matthew 28 to his disciples, all authority has been given to me. He has power over all of this. This is nothing. All of these powers that people are fooling around with and exposing themselves to, these evil spirits, they're nothing. Jesus can just, with his breath, can slay them. So I want people to realize that Jesus Christ has power over all of this, and God, for his own purposes, is allowing, Satan to deceive people. He's allowing for his own purposes. It's all part of what's going on in his plan. And he's given us warnings. He's told us to avoid these things. So we know, he's told us that. So that's for our own good. And
Amen.
That's, it's not like we're sitting here, we're like, oh, what's going on? God's told us. And so for Christians out there, just remember that Jesus Christ is in charge. He can pull anybody out of the occult. I mean, I was in the New Age for 20 years. I was an astrologer. I was very hardened. I was very rebellious. I was against Christianity. And I mean, he saved me, I mean, God can save, he can reach anybody. So if you know people involved, pray for them. Don't give up on them. Pray for them. And remember that Jesus Christ is in charge of this, that 1 John 5, in that chapter, it says the evil one cannot touch you. So as a Christian, you need to remind yourself of who Jesus is, of his power and authority, of his love for you, and also that we should be obedient to God's word. And if you're not a Christian, then the world really doesn't make sense if you're not a Christian, because what you see out there is all this bad stuff going on, people that are evil, that kill people, that rob people, people into the occult, all kinds of scary bad stuff is going on. And I mean, without God, without a savior, it to me, then you have to come up with a way to make it make sense, which is what I tried to do for a really long time. But there were always holes in my views. They didn't really cohere. There were big gaps in them. But with Jesus, knowing Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who came to die to pay the penalty for sins, God made a way to be with him forever, and that is through faith in Jesus Christ. And when you have faith in Christ, you are forgiven of your sins because he paid for them for you. And you are forgiven, and you have eternal life. I mean, Jesus Christ himself says this. And he is ruling over all powers and authorities. So I just was reading that in Colossians. We're going through Colossians in my church, and that's in Colossians 2. And so I want to end on a message, of hope and affirmation and reminding people of Jesus Christ, because the demons tremble at the name of Jesus Christ,
Amen.
And so we need to remember that, and not, while we need to be careful and we don't want to expose ourselves to the stuff I've been talking about, and we definitely don't want to participate in it, we don't need to be afraid, and we just need to be prudent. And so that's my final. That's my final
Amen. Well, we're gonna have to do this again. I know that on the recording we got an hour and 33 minutes.
Yeah,
it just popped
long.
up. Yeah, no, I wasn't worried about that. And like I said, Marcia, it's very rare that I got to do what I have to do tonight. That's the problem with running. Running a ministry out of a truck. It's tough sometimes. And,
yes, I'm sure. You do a great job, and that's fine, By the way, Mona, I heard your testimony. It's a wonderful testimony.
Had to jump. It's her birthday today, and she is down in Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah, that's why she jumped. Some of the ladies that drive through there that she deals with, they stopped at her yard and picked her up, and they took her out to dinner or something. Yeah, that's why she's not on here right now. Yeah, she just sent me a text. Yeah, she just. Man came as a nose.